Believe it or not, it's the first time that we're starting on time. And so we are not being very French. Usually we are fashionably late, but thank you all for being here. So I'm Clémentine Tolos, one of the organizers, and my colleague Laurence Cossu-Beaumont is over here. So it's a real pleasure to welcome you all. And it's the third edition of our roundtable series, Contemporary Black Artists in Museums, a French-American conversation. So this last session takes place in a particular meaningful moment. In 2026, France is commemorating the 25th anniversary of the Taubira Law, which recognized slave trade and slavery as crimes against humanity. So earlier this month, on the 10th of May, France observed a national day of remembrance of slave trade, slavery, and their abolition. And at the end of the week, in a few days, on the 23rd of May, it will mark the National Day of Remembrance of the Victims of Slavery. These Republican landmarks remind us of the way we take responsibility for the past and how taking responsibility for the past continues shaping the present and influences the future we are willing to imagine. So Laurence and I are deeply committed to keeping these questions alive at Sorbonne Nouvelle University through exchanges with contemporary visual artists. Today, we are very grateful to welcome two major women artists, Alison Saar and Gaëlle Choisne. So in their practices, they Donatien, you are right. You are absolutely right. I'm a very bad hostess, so it was really the right moment for an applause. Thank you. So, in their practices, they explore the legacies of the transatlantic slave trade, the enduring scars of colonial violence, but also the resilience of bodies, memories, and spiritual forces in the face of historical erasure. Gaëlle and Alison create works that operate as vessels of layered histories of domination, dispossession, but also histories of survival, transmission, healing, and transformation. So their creations invite us to revisit intimate memory and collective history, ancestral presences, and contemporary struggles through installation, sculpture, performance, assemblage, and public art. Bringing them together tonight is a way to reflect on the resonances that emerge across generations of artists. And rather than expanding too much on their work, I will just let them speak in their own voices, since we're here to listen to them. But before, so we would like to thank you once again, Gaëlle and Alison, for being with us. And we would like to thank as well Marianne Ibrahim, Donatien Gros, and François Mérès. So Marianne Ibrahim will moderate tonight's conversation. He's the founder of Marianne Ibrahim Gallery, with spaces in Chicago, Paris, and Mexico. And she has become a major voice in the contemporary art world for sustained commitment to artists from Africa and the African diaspora. Donatien Gros is head of contemporary programs at the Musée du Louvre, where he developed dialogues between contemporary creation and the museum's collection. And François Mérès, a distinguished professor of museology at Université Sorbonne Nouvelle, is, among others, other things, the coordinator of Hermes, a major research program on emerging forms of heritage and new approaches to patrimonialization. So before we begin, we also would like to thank all the partners who have made this event possible, the Terra Foundation for American Art, which has supported the project with great trust and generosity, the Institut des Amériques, the Frame Network for its precious advice, and we also would like to thank Nadia Chalby from Musée d'Art Moderne de la Ville de Paris, who introduced us to Gaëlle Choisne's work, as they have often collaborated. We also would like to extend our thanks to the team of La Chancellerie des Universités, especially Madame Fréchard and Madame Maubré and their technical teams, And our gratitude also goes to the audiovisual team of Sorbonne Nouvelle. Samuel and Nicolas are here with us, and they have supported the project for 3 years, so we are very, very grateful. So thank you everyone for being here, and we are very happy to open this conversation. Have a great moment with us.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Clémentine. I'm very honored and very actually stressed to be moderating this panel because I'm normally on the other side. I'm being interviewed. But since there are two wonderful artists, two women artists that I admire from afar, I kind of accepted the challenge. So I hope you will have a good conversation along with my panelists, François and Donatien. And one of the things that I wanted to start with is to also acknowledge a lot of curators and art historians who have dedicated their life to the Black art studies. And I would like to cite first Okwe and Wizor, B.C. Silva, and our late sister Koyo Kwo, who was the curator for the Venice Biennial. So it's very important to set that because we will explore this conversation and these spaces and these practices, but without historians specialized and who have been spending their lifetime writing about it, I don't think we can, continue from a deeper voice this conversation. So one thing that Okwe said was one of his central ideas was that diaspora is never a fixed condition, but it's rather, from his word, a journey into becoming, a process marked by incessant regroupings, recreations, and reiteration, one that aims to open up new spaces of discursive and performative post-colonial consciousness. So it is precisely within this process and perpetual becoming that the work of Alison and Gaëlle finds its most urgent meeting point. So both artists incarnate the hyphen. You inhabit what we call here in French, the trait d'union. And the institutional frames in which you operate could not be more different. Because in the United States, decades of struggle have created these spaces. The Studio Museum of Harlem, where you had your first residence, the HBCU, which stands for the Historically Black College Universities, Black Council, the Black Art Council at the MoMA. So all of these spaces have created the platforms for Black artistic creations. France was shaped by a sort of a Republican universalism, which completely alienates and negates any racial regroupings, any racial categorization. So there's not a space that is equivalent in French of such sort. So I would say that the black narrative in institution is often a political act. So talking about the institution, since we have great representation in terms of the people who operate in those spaces, this conversation asks to ask ourselves what it means to be in those spaces, but it also means when the institution housing your work, how the institution housing your work may connect, recognize the tradition behind your work. So the first question is about geography. And the question that I will ask you as an opening is, does the place where you operate influence your work or the audience?
Can I start? Thank you very much to everyone. I think I'm always really influenced by the external environment. I think it's something really important to stay, and in my practice, to stay all the time really sensitive and connected. and of course connected to myself and what I am, and to be an artist, black woman artist in France, it's such a long path, and I have this feeling it was a lot of struggle, and I even like force my space, my place. But I'm really proud to be here tonight with you, because it also means something changed a little bit in this society.
Yeah, and I guess I don't think it has to be an either or. I think it's both, and I think, you know, there's so many levels in terms of even your audience. I think there's the audience the artist wants. Okay, sorry. I think there's the audience that we want to reach as artists that we're specifically addressing. And then there's the audience that haps upon your work. And then there's the audience that that feels like it's your family. And so I think there's lots of different things you put out there, and hopefully the work, when you do put it out, that you know, you're finding audiences that don't anticipate. So I think it's kind of a little bit of both, and the place as well.
I just, you know, I think it's interesting what you were saying in terms of a French versus American, because I think that, you know, in France, the better side of the French way is that intersectionality is a given. So individuals are individuals, and they come with many different identities, and they are celebrated as individuals. And I'll just very briefly, I was the lead curator, co-lead curator for the museum celebration of Barbara Chaise-Ribot across the museums in Paris. And if you ask Barbara who she is a Parisienne. She's not American, she's not African American, she wants to be a Parisienne. And she is a Parisienne that carries within herself all those histories. It's not that she negates them, it's that she has taken them with them to be where she is now. And it's been very interesting to see that, you know, when we did this project, people said to us, to my co-curator and Gilbert and myself, so you're celebrating a black artist, you're celebrating an African-American artist, and we had very generous support from Tara and Ford. But we said, no, we are celebrating Barbara Chaise-Ribot, this amazing artist who hasn't had a major museum show since 1973 in Paris, where she lived for 60 years. So I think it's an interesting way to see how these approaches and this notion of the localization of culture, as Homi Kebaba would say, can sort of interact, and how being localized, as you were saying, Gaëlle, is having all those different lives within you, and to be there as an individual, part of a collective, potentially.
Thank you, Donatien. But there is a lot of interesting points in what you're saying, but I mean, there are also reality when we look at the institutions. And the institutions that are mostly in France, compared to the institution in the UK, we can clearly see that there are gaps in terms of their process of exhibiting artists of color, or of a certain, you know, geographic parts. There are also limitation in terms of the repartition of acquisition in institutions. So how do we address that compared to institutions in the USA, where there is a clear will and desire to compensate? I'm not going as far as the deaccession process, but there is clearly a making up for the lack in terms of diversity.
Yeah, I mean, but you know, Darren Walker said what we did with Barbara, nobody could have done it in the US. So it's you know, it's interesting that actually, I would say there are several questions in your question, the same way as there were several points in my statement. And then I'll stop because we're here to hear from the artist and not from the institutional voice. But I think that you know, as you know well, and that's a story we retraced in the Black Model show when I was at the Musée d'Orsay, you know, that show, no museum wanted in New York. Proposed to MoMA, didn't take it. Proposed to the Met, didn't take it. Proposed to the Musée d'Orsay, took it. So Denise went to all the museums. I mean, I hope we're not being recorded worldwide right now, but she went to all the museums in New York, and they said no. And we said yes. So I think that the way we look at things in France, for better or for worse, and I'm not saying it doesn't mean we have holes in there, things that haven't been recognized. I'm absolutely not hiding that. I'm just saying we look at artists as, you know, figures that have their own path, some of whom were indeed not recognized the way they should have been. But as we look at things now, we look at these individualities that carry within themselves all those different identities. There's not one identity that is put to the forefront. There's Gaëlle, Choisne, Alison, and them carrying their own work, which of course has limitation, I agree. But then there is a work actually, first of all, but I'm really not a specialist of that, so I can only talk about what I really know. But there were a lot of acquisitions that were made, particularly at the CNAP. Barbara Chase-Ribou was acquired first by French Museum, way before American museums, early 70s. So just the thing is that we were not able to show what there was. And we had a problem of transmission, we have a problem of presentation, which is what you're saying, Marianne. And I think that there is a path, there is a new way, I think, to find in which individuals are themselves part of a collective, but that the individuals we present are not from this, are not only, because, you know, it's great to see we're open and everybody's equal, but of course if we're open and everybody's equal and the only people who exhibit are, you know, white males, there's a problem. And looking at I think there is a way, and then I'll stop, to have that approach in which an individual is themselves, but actually be more open and right about who those individuals can and should be. And then I'll stop because really we want to hear from you.
Thank you. Jumping on that, I'm also interested in the place of formation and the disparities. Alison, you did your first residence at the Studio Museum of Harlem. Tell us, how is the process in terms of the formation and the training in your time as a student? Why? Because then I'm going to, of course, jump on Gaëlle, who had to sort of get a level of recognition by leaving France and getting, you know, sort of her academics in another institution outside of France. So how are those spaces been welcoming artists who were dealing with the subject that you were dealing?
Yeah, and I think, you know, the Studio Museum wasn't really happening until the 70s as well. So there's a long history of nothing, basically. And even the, you know, the black colleges were not necessarily being, one of them didn't even have the gallery spaces. And so I think, you know, for myself coming into it, there really wasn't a whole lot going on. And the Studio Museum was just, I think I was there early 80s. And so it was really refreshing and exciting to have that space, but, oh, am I not talking loud enough? I'm sorry, I may lean into it. Yeah, so it just, I don't know, I've lost my concentration. But.
Yes. No, it's more about your early years as an artist, as a black female artist, as an artist who's dealing with a particular theme, such as, you know, spirituality and.
Right, and I think maybe also I had an advantage in that I was coming out of a family, my sister's here as well today, of black, especially specifically black women artists, and then working with Samela Lewis, who was one of the first, you know, historians to recognize black contemporary artists, along with David Driscoll. And so, you know, I've kind of felt really fortunate that I connected with those people really early on, but they were the people that was kind of like, you know, building these blocks that so many of us are relying on today. So I felt really fortunate in that I had access to those folks.
What about you, Gaëlle? What were your references and your inspirations?
I think it's difficult. When I was in school, I was quite alone, no references, maybe, yeah, Paul Gilroy books in the library. So I felt really isolated, and we were just maybe 3 students colored in the school, so I felt really like aliens. And I just try to, I travel a lot in Caribbean because it's also particular because this layer also to be a mixed culture. So a part of my mother, she's from Haiti, and my father from France, and born in France, cut to a part of my culture. This Haitian culture was also the first purpose in my studies to rebalance a part that I miss a lot. So I travel a lot in Haiti, I film a lot there, and I try to, I felt really comfortable in Caribbean actually, in general. In Cuba, at this period, I can travel in Cuba, Mexico. So I felt really well in this balance between Caribbean and come back in France and mix everything together, because it was also my way to be, to think, because I had the two different way to be educated in a way, you know, to be honest. So yeah, it was, I just try to find information, readings. It was really difficult actually, like 15 years ago actually. And now I think in France, it's also different. I saw a lot of evolution, good evolution in this way, and yeah, for good news, you know. But it's really slow. It's really slow for me, to be honest.
What were the parts that was missing, I would say, your practice and the knowledge, because obviously we were turning to the US to get our references, or
Yeah.
the Caribbean. I mean, more like I would say, English-speaking.
Yeah, thinkers, English speaking, and also figures. When I did this, I had this wonderful opportunity to do this duo show with Lorna Simpson. I visited her in her studio in Brooklyn, and I felt so, I just realized, I was like, wow, I didn't have this figure mentorship, you know, this black woman as a like brilliant artist can be a reference for me. And I realized that when I had this exhibition and she was my mentor, and I felt so upset, but you know, like I just realized that, because when you miss something you don't know, it's just when you face it, you realize you missed that, you know what I mean? So I think it's just figures, woman, black figures I miss.
And the companionship, which you probably,
Yeah.
you know, sort of a have. I know we have some works going on, but we would like to hear more about your practice. So you have pretty, I would not call it similar, but there is, you know, convergences in the work of found objects and you know, sanctifying objects, and also turning the objects into a personal, you know, a personal, you know, and ancestral memories. So can you tell us a little bit about how is your process and how you?
Yeah, for
For
myself, when I know that we're both scroungers, we like to pick stuff off the street and put things in our pockets and things like that. So yeah, I'm really interested in kind of, you know, I think initially it really just came out of just being broke and really needing to find materials, couldn't afford to go get fancy canvases and all of that. But as I started collecting things, and I think also even in our childhood, we lived in Laurel Canyon, which was a neighborhood that was devastated by terrible fires in the 50s, not unlike the fires that we just had last year in Altadena. And so we would find these things, and they had this history to these, melted objects that had these histories. So it became really early on, and this is like, when I was 5 or 6, in sort of the history of objects and materials and what they've experienced, and that they could bring something to the work. And so when I later moved to New York and was, before I became a resident in Harlem, I was actually working at the Studio Museum. But, stuff was being thrown. It was in the 80s, so a lot of stuff was being changed around. And so I was finding all these things, and the notion that, this ceiling tin or this linoleum was really something that had witnessed Harlem lives, from the 1920s, turn of the century on. And so I just really love that these materials kind of had a sense of, specific history and connected to ancestors in that way as well. So I love that material, finding these materials and working with them.
Yeah, I think my practice to walk, finally, it came like that to just when you walk kilometers and kilometers, you find a lot of things on the floor, which is amazing because it's become a world. And so I had the collection of play cards that I find a lot, and it's also like a spiritual way because it's become a sign. But there is also some objects, and I stick them on my paintings now. And I think also this idea of recycling, because I think when I was kid, I didn't have like a fancy life, so we miss of things, of course. So we always have to take care of everything and don't throw up. So I think this, this habit stay in my practice to don't throw up everything, but just give a second life to things supposed to be trash. And then I discovered several materials like plaster, ceramics, but also metal. I think the way the transformation of the matter, like solid, liquid, solid, it's fascinating me, and I love to play with that. And I think I thought when I was at school, I was not a really good, virtuose. I didn't have like a real quality to be a good artist. So I start to really do like just with pleasure and this way to also heal myself. I think it was a way to escape about like reality and create my world where I feel good and I feel safe, It was just also a way to just escape realities also. And then I mix everything and it's become installation and without any shame, because also I really want to share this idea of everyone can do and create is something for everyone, and the judgment is something violent in a way. We can just do, and it's part of the humanity to create, I think.
Could you speak about the role of museums in your formation, in your early years?
Well, I went to a lot of museums.
Mm-hmm.
My father worked at the Natural History Museum before the Los Angeles County Art Museum existed. So really young, just kind of like literally crawling around in those spaces. And then he also was working at LACMA for a while. And so it was just a place where we would go. And I think because both of my parents were artists, we were constantly being dragged to openings and seeing art, sometimes, not interested in what we were seeing, but it was, kind of through osmosis, and I think also it was kind of, if you think in terms of language, I think, that we really, because we grew up in a visual space, that, the visual arts was really our first language. And so it was kind of hard to see it as, it wasn't like going to school or becoming a teenager and discovering art. It was something that we were experiencing 24/7, so it's kind of inescapable.
For me, it was just nature. I was in the beach and in the forest. I discovered museum when I started school, fine art school. I was really like a virgin. But when I started these studies, I always traveled to Berlin, London. Fortunately or unfortunately, we had these really cheap flights. So I saw a lot of exhibition, a lot of big artist installation like Jeff Boy's installation or like American minimalist installation in real. And I think, of course, it makes the difference. Of course. I think the most important memories that I had, it was the exhibition of Bacon in Milan. I just realized the difference between a book and a real painting. And I was shocked, and I was like, wow, I love Bacon, it's my favorite painter. And so it was really late for me to discover the museum and institutions.
And kind of, if I can hijack and ask a question, Marianne, is that okay? Because you're the MC. Okay. So kind of building up on François's question, I think there's something I would like to ask both of you, because, you know, Gaëlle, you and I work together on the Copiste show, and Alison, your work takes a number of forms that come from history, the figure of Venus, the narrative of history. And then, of course, one of the things that you may criticize about France is that we believe in patrimoine. We believe in cultural heritage. Of course, when you come partly from the Afro-diasporic experience, the notion of heritage isn't exactly the same for a number of reasons that we know. So I would be very interested in asking you both how you relate to the past. What is the past? Which past? Because I think it's also a point that connects you, because you're both very much about the present, but also very aware of these patterns of historicity. So I would be very interested.
Yeah, and also a quick jump back to museums, I think also because the first museums I was going to were natural history museums.
Oh.
So really some of the first art I was seeing was art from Mexico and from Africa and the continent. And so I was really seeing these things and these objects more so than contemporary art and really early on. But, you know, for me, I'm really interested in, I think, my reference to historical times and you know, looking specifically at the enslavement and the slave trade to the Americas. I'm really interested in it because I feel that we are still very much living that in the present. And so it's a way to talk about these histories and to really talk about how we're experiencing these similar things, and even more so now, although I did say I wouldn't talk about our present. But even more so now in the United States, you know, as we're seeing things being unraveled, it just feels like these histories are really important more so than ever because we are straight up against them all over again, sort of thing. So I think it's just an interesting way to, one, attempt to reconcile still what we're suffering, and to really address that what we see and hear and do now is still very much affected by that.
Yeah, I think I'm totally agree. I think for me, the present is the past because we bring everything in us, like the present, the future, and the past in the same time. It's really Quantum vision. But of course, in my practice, I need to come back to understand. Also in Haiti, for example, what happened. And I was shocked when I discovered the link between France and Haiti. And I was like, why I never learned that at school? And it was in general, but it was also my story, my family story. So I thought maybe I was really angry because I thought there is a lot of lake, there is a lot of lies, and yeah, I miss this past. Also because there is like this adaptation in a certain way to speak French at school, so my mother didn't want to transmit me the Creole. So I miss in my private life this past, and then in the school I miss this past, and in my life. So art become a place where I can find some fragments and like a puzzle, try to create some elements or clues and recreate pieces of something that we can call past. And I think it was also a motivation to do art because need also to reformulate or recreate something, or at the end invent new shapes or new stories, because there is no stories, we cannot find them, they're myths. So,
and maybe it's a question that I also want to ask you, Marianne, because you know a lot of your work as a gallerist, because you have both represented and you represent both young artists, but also I remember you a few years ago you started represented the late great Lauren O'Grady, with whom I worked when I was at Orsay, and so I think there is, I mean, we know we're not the center and you're not the center, and Alison and Gaëlle are the center, but I would be interested because I do think you are yourself doing a gesture that is very much about the present and about writing a form of history.
It's a quest, actually. It's a quest because we didn't have the tools in France to be able to address all of the questions that the African American were dealing. You know, we had, we didn't have any civil rights movement, right? We didn't have any, we've had the négritude, of course, which was very important, but we did not have the extent of the narrative and being able to connect. So later, I understood that sort of an intellectual quest was somehow indirectly reflected on the work that I was doing. Because I often use that sort of image of putting a compass in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and then you make a circle, and what you're trying to connect is all of the dots from Europe, Africa, South America, North America, is to be able to bring together all of these fragments through the artists and to see what is the connection between, works of Nigerian artists and Brazilian artists, for instance, because they share the same, spirits. So it's probably a lifetime quest that I'm trying to translate visually through the narratives of other artists. So I need the support of the artists to be able to construct this gigantic puzzle. So that's what our program humbly is trying to do, is to just bring together that Afro-Atlantic histories, which was also subject to a fantastic exhibition in Sao Paulo, which then traveled to the US. And it was also a discovery for African Americans about those narratives, and also for Brazilians to also connect with that. So it's not exclusively that, but it is the part that I'm interested in, connecting also the different narratives. But I would like to jump on a question for both of you regarding those fragments, because I'm wondering if the medium that you have chosen allows you to sort of recreate or speculate narratives.
At first?
Yeah, I mean,
Passing the buck.
I don't have limitation with mediums. That's maybe the best way to to recreate the puzzle. When I start to do like documentary, I don't like this term because I realize I did some research and it's the initial story of the cinema documentaire is totally colonial, of course. It was just like hunters filming the jungle. And so even the cinema or the film become like, oh, I can't do only film. I can't just do a documentary because I will do the same than I want to destroy or describe. So even that, I have to find another way to do this experimental essay, visual essay. So all the time, I think I like to mix different practice, different reference from elitist practice and mix them with a lot of more popular gesture in a way. It's a way to find some. I don't know if I find some answer, but put some questions on the table.
Well, I think kind of creating the narrative, it's, aside from the materials, I think also I find myself kind of trying to recycle ideas in the way histories have been presented in the past. And I think, often because I went to humanitarian, college which was based in humanities, and we were being bombarded with Greek and Roman histories, and so these mythologies, then I became really interested in kind of like turning them on their heads and really talking about our narrative and our experience through these sort of very staid traditional narratives. So I'm kind of playing off of, and I think what also, when you're talking about audiences, it kind of is a bait of a certain sort, to like, oh, I know this story, I know the story of Odysseus, or I know the story of that, but maybe we didn't really look at who the Queen of the Amazons was, and the other side of that story. And as we are talking about histories, we know that these histories have been written without us in mind, and so to kind of go in and take those histories and then sort of recycle them or maybe invert them, kind of turn them inside out, I think is kind of what I'm interested in, kind of playing with those old narratives and reforming them.
I have a question, which is kind of...
I've got a question as well, if
Do you want to go
you
first,
allow me.
Clémentine?
Because it's a follow-up question.
Do you want to go?
Otherwise,
Okay, please.
So I was just wondering, because we are talking about re-narrating, recycling, creating new narratives. I was wondering about institutional resistance. Were there projects that you wanted to present that were rebuked or rejected by some museums, and you had really to fight to convince people that these projects were valuable and that it is important to show them? Because we take it as a kind of given. Now France, well, the US has led the path, and France is following after the US. Having black artists in museum is something that is becoming more common.
I don't agree. I'm sorry. Toni Morrison got a solo show at the Louvre. Neither the Met nor MoMA nor the National Gallery offered it to her. I think the history is more complex. I think it's...
But I think I really would like, for Gaëlle and Alison to be able to give us examples of projects they were convinced that were, for which they were convinced that they were essential, and they were faced with institutional resistance. Or maybe not, maybe.
In French, I did this project during 1 year in Palais de la Porte Dorée. I had a lot of fight all the time. because, I mean, as you said, there is a lot of Black women artists in museum, but most of them are from America. It's really difficult for France to face her story, like French, Black, or mixed culture story, I can say. So it was an invitation from Papendai. Then you have to leave, so I was quite alone in the Palais de la Porte Dorée. No allies around me, and I proposed a lot of works that was refused because too difficult to listen, too difficult to face some realities. Yeah, I mean, it's it's difficult. I cannot give a precise example, but my two experiences in two huge institutions, Musée de la Musique in Philharmonie and Palais de la Porte Dorée, was an invitation, first of all, but then with some conditions sometimes. You know, it's something difficult to, yeah.
I can say, because I'm also on the other side, so we're defending the artists and we know where are the resistance. In fact, I quite like the resistance. If there is an invitation, that is already, you put a foot into the space. It's the non-invitations. It's all of the opportunities that are not given to a certain group of people because the institutions either have done one last year and they don't want to repeat because it's too many. So there is, if there is at least one project to that. So I mean I don't want to speak for you, but it's how to know how many. How do you know the works, the projects that did not happen if they don't come to you? So
Yeah, I
behind
agree,
closed door, I think Donatien is probably in the best position because he is behind those closed doors, and he would know which no pressure, but it is also reality. That,
Yeah, the invitation, I agree, is the first step.
Yes.
Alison, what about you?
Well, maybe my case is more in terms of what you just said, is that I've not had these invitations from museums or institutions at all. And so I've never kind of been up against that resistance because I've never had the opportunity to present stuff to them. But I have had actually the good fortune to work with galleries, Lelong, which is here tonight, and also in Los Angeles and in New York. The good fortune to work with galleries that basically let me show up with whatever I want to present. And I think sometimes they have never said no. They have never said, we won't show this, but I know that it is difficult as a gallerist to sometimes deal with the very economic realities of showing work that is really difficult and uncomfortable for a lot of people. So yeah, I've just been very fortunate.
So my question is very different. So I had the great fortune, I mean, this is the first time I'm telling this story, so it's just for you, welcoming David Hammonds at the Louvre. And so we walked across the museum for 2 hours and a half. It was maybe a year and a half ago. And what really interested me is that most of the time when we welcome someone, we think they're going to want to see the Mona Lisa. And maybe Delacroix, perhaps, let's say the great highlights. And what was very interesting with my visit with him is that we started with the Near Eastern antiquities, the first written documents of history, which are kept at the Louvre, the first poem signed by a poet whose name we have. And this poet happens to be a poetess. First poet in history is a woman, by the way. And Hedwana, that we shall mention her name. So in a way, we went through this long duration of time, Egypt, of course. And what was very interesting is that he wasn't that interested in the modern Louvre, you know, painting 15th century to today. He opened up another time, another notion of time that wasn't locked into the temporality of the modern, basically. Modern defined as, you know, 15th century to today with everything it includes in terms of colonization, in terms of exploitation, and all the things we know. And when Alison, when you said you were first interested in natural history, that was your relation to history, and that you were saying, Gaëlle, there was the forest, and then there was a museum. I think what's interesting is that what you are both saying, and I'd be curious to hear your thoughts, I'm sort of hinting towards the idea that there is a way of looking at history that isn't locked into the modern, you know, like this 500-year history. So I'd be curious to hear both of your thoughts about that. Sorry, I'm hijacking my end, but I'm just genuinely curious.
No, I would like to quickly answer to that, because what you're referring to those artists, naturally, there is art history and art history.
Yeah.
And the art history that has been sold to us for a very long time as Black people has not been something that comes at first, you know, that we know, we've learned. It's the other, the untold stories that we're interested. But I do remember when you were working at the Musée d'Orsay, the first painting you took me to see was on Henry Ossawa Tanner. And Henry Ossawa Tanner he's the only Black American impressionist.
French.
Living in France, okay, we get this, we understand your universalism.
You are making everyone
once
French.
Once you enter into the French machine, you become universalist. But what I'm saying is like, he's coming from Philadelphia. He got all of his education in the fine arts.
But his big commissions in France.
But he came, okay, he met a French woman. That happens. But you took me there because I think you also are sensitive about the quest that artists or Black creatives would want. That's what I would do if I was going to take someone to the Louvre or would take someone, I would try to connect with that. And so certainly, if you were going to come to any of the museums, and I will let you answer that question, it's probably a due diligence, I would say.
Sorry.
Sorry, I will let you answer this question.
Maybe you should ask it again, I'm sorry.
No, my question was about the opening up, basically, and that goes also to what Marianne was saying. You know, I was interested in this visit that he wasn't set onto a canon of modern art history that has been told. He was opening it up geographically and chronologically. And so I think it says something about a way of looking at the past, our history, which isn't set on a certain modern narrative as it has been told. And I think, and that it goes into different areas, and that therefore is maybe more contemporary than this relatively set narrative of our history, as François was saying, of the museum. That's my question. I don't know if it's clearer, maybe not.
No, it's not, sorry.
I mean,
I understood, but
Okay.
I don't know.
what are you looking at when you in terms of institutions? Is there some kind of a close relationship? I mean, often you look for a level of representation. Are you interested in exploring the unknown? Is there a connection that you have, especially from in Europe and in those institutions? Do you see what is missing, or do you see what you could be filled with, you know?
More often than not, we're seeing what is missing. And I think, you know, it's often you're seeing, you know, I remember at one point I was invited to do a tour of the Getty. And what I decided to do was have it be a treasure hunt to find Black faces in the Getty's collection. And I think we came up with about 10.
10 out of what?
10 out of everything, and I would say 90% of them were enslaved people. And so, you know, and you know, clearly it's not a, you know, they don't collect contemporary work or anything, but, you know, they have just a very small idea of what they saw as art in the premise of their collection. But, so sometimes I do that. When I'll go to a museum, I'll go and see where if I see faces of color and on what pretense. But, you know, I think also sometimes you just go in and see, you know, just let things speak to you and connect with you and not to kind of go in with a set mind in terms of making a tally of this or that, because we've not only gone into museums, you know, we just had the Guerrilla Girls exhibition at the Getty as well, and you know that was all about tallying of what women were in the exhibitions and in the shows and in the museums. And so you can go through these institutions and just create these tallies, but I think get really frustrated and get really angry, and maybe then you know that's how change comes about, by you know sitting on the steps and or plastering billboards around saying that this is what's lacking. But I think for myself, I'm just in there to try and see what's there.
I mean, it depends which institutions. If I'm coming in Louvre, of course, I will directly go to Egyptian civilization because I have this feeling I can find some clues there, some traces of or reconnection of what I looking for energetically or aesthetically. But when I was young, my father was really obsessed with Impressionists, so I spent a lot of time in Orsay, and also happy to discover the real paintings compared to photos and books. But I think there is an history, but I'm not into this history, you know, in this museum. So now I'm really happy to say you can see my work in the Palais de la Porte Dorée, in the Immigration Museum, because it's still there, and or in the Musée d'Art Moderne, because I have this feeling, we try to change a little bit the reference. And I remember when I worked in the Musée d'Art Moderne, a long time ago, Mohamed Bouroussa invited me to do a workshop and an intervention, and he told me, think about your legacy. And I thought to bring a work of Hacy, who was a Cuban French artist. And I asked to the museum to looking for some artworks or archives, but they didn't find anything. And now, because with the new team in the museum, they was also shocked because AC did an exhibition in the 70s, and we were not able to find only one photo. So with the new team in the museum, they also were really shocked about that. So they decided to buy the work of AC. So now you can also see AC in the museum, in the permanent collection. So I think it's slowly rebalance this diversity that we have in France.
Yeah. And I think it's also the question of shared heritage. You know, it's a story I always like to tell, you know, about French and Americans, you know, liking, as a good Frenchman, to be a little critical of our American counterparts. I'll try to make it very brief. 5 years ago, during COVID, on Black Lives Day, the Met decided to post "I Am a Man" by Glenn Ligon. a work they don't own, without speaking to the artist. And they own a set of prints by Glenn. They don't, and that set of prints was actually donated to them. They didn't buy it. Immediately, Glenn posted saying, "How dare you," more or less. You imagine the Met posts a work, the artist, Glenn Ligon, says, "How dare you?" New York Times article, Max Hollines get interviewed, what happened, etc. And then, you know, what was interesting, what they didn't know at the Met is that Glenn, when he was 16, a young, black, gay boy growing up in the Bronx, would go to the Met and copy Cézanne. He would go to the Met and literally it was his place. And they didn't think of saying that Cézanne was his history as well. They thought that he did I Am a Man, we'll put I Am a Man, you know. And this is something I thought a lot about. It's not an African diasporic story, but it is in a way. When I arrived at the Louvre, because we have a similar figure, it's Kader Attia. Kader Attia, when he was 12, growing up in Garges-les-Gonesse, went to the Louvre, was in front of the meal, the repas, by the Lenin brothers, and he looked at this work and he saw the poverty, the sheer poverty of those people. And next to him were these two bourgeois ladies, and they were saying, "It's so beautiful," looking at the way the work was painted, while young Kader could only see the mystery. And for him, it was a huge event in his head, because he had to confront the fact that, yes, it was beautiful, but it was also mystery. And he describes this moment as being kind of a foundational moment for his life as an artist, which is why we invited him to have a studio at the Louvre and be part of our programs. But I do think that there is one aspect, which is what we're talking about how we can rewrite, I mean, not rewrite, but expand and see what there has been, but also recognize that the works that are in these museums are a shared legacy and a shared heritage. So that's sort of what we try to do, the French.
Not all. We're talking about also, what do you call it, the retributions, that some parts and some objects are leaving these beautiful institutions back to their owners, but that's another topic. Also, I would like to invite you also to engage with us regarding
I was also thinking about the role of institution, and I had something that came in my mind. It was an article written in the Encyclopedia Universalis in the early 70s. It was about personal museums, musées personnels. That was a hot topic in the Documenta 5 at that moment. And I remember it was written, as far as I remember, by Gilbert Lascaux. He said that most of the artists that were at that moment more contemporary were not so much fan of visiting art museums, but especially they were enthusiastic about the Musée des Arts et Traditions Populaires, the National Museum of Art and Craft that was opened in 1976. And I remember once I talked to Christian Boltanski, and he told me that museum at that moment was so fascinating for him because it was something that he never saw in a museum at that moment, and that opened his eyes. And it gives me also, actually, it's a connection with your story with natural history museums, because it's a totally different world of museums, but when we are speaking about museums, we are not speaking only about art museums, it's just a very small part. And what is interesting also, and it's a question for Gaëlle, but somehow I would be interested to discuss it also with you, Alison. It's the role of what we call in France society museum, musée de société, which is pretty difficult to translate, actually. You do not have this type of category. For instance, the museum the National Museum of History of Immigration is supposed to be a musée de société, society museum, which means that it's both, it speaks about questions and problems of society, of contemporary societies, but not only of contemporary societies, but also about the past. It gives some glimpses from with art and contemporary art, but also with history, also with ethnography, etc. And I was wondering how you felt this relation, because it's not specifically just an art museum, but it's also a kind of more open museum somehow. If you have this, if you could find also, Alison, this kind of museums in the US, and how you would call them, because it's not a community museum, nor a classic art museum, nor a general museum. It's very specific somehow. I don't know how you could explain your experience with this.
I mean, I think it's. I think the problematic is to. I spoke a lot through my heart about, of course, colonial history or mixed hybridation or mixed culture or a lot of topics, but not only. Of course, it's also shapes. It's also colors and aesthetic or non-aesthetic. And I think it's about the categorization that we talk about. It's to be categorized somewhere else. So yeah, I was invited to speak about this topic because I'm supposed to be the best person to speak about that. And I tend to be an artist. And I think it's really slow in France to have just only this, not in reference to my color of my skin or my background. And in the same time, it's tricky, I can say. It's because I did a lot of exhibition, and I have also a great career outside France, international career. For example, the next invitation will be in Mazy Museum for the Harald Sisman birthday. I'm so happy and proud to be don't categorized anymore, but just invited because I propose some immersive installation, and it can be in link with Monte Verita, and it's two different stories, but and I think that's the problem in France. Also, can be also like a problematic is to put some artists in the artist like. Posture of the black artist,
I mean, that's when we want to be Americans. That's the problem. And I think that's the worst thing. When I think it's perfect because you're exactly echoing what I said at the beginning. That when we invited you for Copies, because I co-curated this exhibition last year at the Centre Pompidou Metz, you were Gaëlle Choisne. You were Gaëlle Choisne. Gaëlle Choisne is Gaëlle Choisne.
Yeah, but it's not always like that. It depends. It depends the curator. It depends the context.
It's a necessary pain to be in these categories, because how could we be sure that that we're not falling into exceptionalism, that we are not only having one artist and then we will completely ignore the others? I would like to live in a world where your gender and your skin color and all of that will be disregarded, especially in those institutions. But we just have to look at the facts and see if the institution is not practicing that sort of a resistance, then why aren't they more? You were talking about Barbara Chase-Ribou, who was the first artist to be. But we've had one of the most amazing postmodernist painter, Beaufort Delaney, living here in our soul for 25 years, and not a single major museum show in France. So I think we can still catch up on a lot of things, but I also think that what we have to do as galleries or private spaces is to bring, together these artists. But the part where we have a lack of representation also come within the curatorial sort of leadership, and it comes also who gets to curate. We've had lately curators coming from the US, Black American curators curating institutions here in France, while we also do have curators that are, Francophone and French, and I think it's also important to exchange, to send our French curators in the US so that they can curate a show of you with their perspective as opposed to, and also receive that. So yes and no on that universalism, because I really think that we are behind, and the best and honest thing that we can say to ourselves is to just catch up that delay and then move forward into a more, Alison, we want to hear more about your experiences in those institutions in the US. What you see. You have, of course, you're in the first row because your mother is an artist. But do you ask yourself these questions in terms of museums and who get to curate and who get to be in those spaces? Because you also have a knowledge on East and West Coast, which also is important to see what are the differences. And it's a question that I wanted to ask you. How do you see the US in those two coast and tradition of showing artists of color?
I think that maybe kind of what's happening in France in terms of, a lot of American artists being shown, Black American artists being shown here, and I've heard some folks saying that maybe that Black French artists aren't getting shown and that Black American artists being shown instead. And it makes me think of really how, this is not necessarily racially based, but how in Los Angeles for a long time we were only seeing New York artists. And there was a whole Los Angeles art scene happening, but only New York artists are being shown and being recognized because that was kind of like the center. And so I think as these centers start disintegrating, that hopefully it becomes more sort of universal. And we were just talking about the word universal, but that those sort of things can start breaking down a little bit. So I think Los Angeles has definitely picked up its pace a little bit. We've got quite a few museums that are pretty good, and so I think we're being seen on both coasts. And I think, for a while, the Black arts movement in Los Angeles and the West Coast was really isolated to the West Coast. Artists, well, unless you were like David Hammonds and Senge Ngunda and, just got up and left. And so artists that stayed, for example, my mother and Charles Dickens and a lot of artists that are still not well known outside of Los Angeles because they decided to stay and try to create this scene in Los Angeles. So it still can be really regional in terms of who's seeing them and who's taking them.
Until today?
I think
We have Henry Taylor at the Picasso Museum.
we have Henry Taylor at the Picasso Museum, and Henry stayed, right? So
But
stayed.
more than Henry, like a figure I'm thinking about is Charles Gaines, who was
Charles
also...
Gaines, right. But
yeah.
this is like, within the last 10 years?
Yeah.
That they finally are getting some recognition. And Charles was also showing in New York, too.
Yeah.
for a long time.
Charles is an interesting one because he's a little like Adrian Piper. He's a scholar as well as being an artist. And I remember because I used to spend a lot of time in LA, and I went to see him maybe 12 years, right before Hauser and Wirth announced the representation. And it was very interesting because the way this completely changed the dynamic that they announced the representation. Because before that, he was an immensely respected artist, but for a relatively small audience. Super cult, but, and then he became something else. And it's particularly interesting in his case because he's part of a group of conceptual Black artists, who are really, really super important historically, and then it became something else.
What are your references for you in terms of, artists that you, American or Caribbean,
I don't like to
drop names?
Yeah, because I think there's so many artists, different artists that I like to refer to Douglas Hubler, which is totally a conceptual artist too. Henri Taylor was a beautiful reference for me. Even like, I don't do painting directly, but and France West. So I like to mix. It's exactly my particularity is I don't like to be categorized or just have like one reference. It's like a multiple of things I saw and I see and I digest and I mix together, and I like that. I think it's the power.
You mentioned Lorna Simpson. Can you tell us about, in depth, and specifically about how this connection came, how this companionship and sort of a mentorship came along?
I think there's something we have also in common with Alison is also this collection. I don't know, is what we want to collect. What is the purpose with this collection or this obsession to find a proof somewhere else? But Lorna also have this collection of images. She had a lot of collection like me, a ceramic collection, and I had also, and I have also a ceramic collection of mugs, not fancy ceramics. So we have, I think, this obsession for the image and the collection of the images, which is, it's funny in a way. So, and to be honest, it was a really personal, quite really personal interaction we had, because we spoke about how it's difficult to find some assistants. Because sometimes you need to work with people, and sometimes it's difficult to find some assistants because you become the manager and you are a woman. Really practical things, I can say, but it's also really important to have this kind of exchange, because it can't happen with everyone,
Donatien, I have a question for you.
Okay.
Maybe one last question before we open questions to the floor.
We want to, because we can definitely see your interest in across the board of different artists and particularly also artists of African descent in the US. If you were going to integrate sort of a carte blanche, or if you were going to create a program in order to, push forward these sort of artists, what would be the process? How would you create those invitations? Because you have a lot of differences in terms of their practice and medium. What happens in your mind when you think of an artist and to invite them in?
It's interesting you ask me that question, but I think that because I'll just say one thing before I respond to your question, because you have said that my stance was one of universalism. It isn't exactly that. In a way, it's the opposite. It's recognizing the individuality and actually building a collective made individuality. It's not like a big holistic universalism. That isn't really what I am interested in and think we should push forward. I think that when we go to a museum, we are all individuals. We're all ourselves, coming with all our stories. And we're, by the way, connected to other people who go there and who are all themselves connected to their stories. And we're all together. So when we invite someone, we invite that person because they are a bridge between the audience and the museum, basically. Which is why, I mean, as you know, the Louvre professor for 2024 was Bachir Soudaiman Dieng, and we talked about the universel du Louvre as an universel latéral, which is a phrase from Merleau-Ponty, not the surplomb, but to the side. And so I think that, you know, I can safely say we are probably, or we are amongst institutions that have had the most diverse program, partly because we do not have to have a program dealing with contemporary figures. We could just open, show these works, and the museum would do its job. So when we do it, and that's why I've never been in charge of contemporary art, but contemporary programs, and I always say that contemporary program means the programmatic space of being in the present. So everything we do has to be programmatic. And within that space, I think if we can, and that's going to sound very hippie, and I'm sorry, we have to create a space of togetherness in which these individuals come to us, come with us. And of course, if today we only invite, you know, white men above 60, we are very, very, very limited. And so, and I think for me, it's much more about the individuals, because the people who go to the museum are individuals. And we never know what's going to happen, what's going to spark an experience in someone. Of course, we can have polls and know that 20% of people come from this country, but we don't know when the miracle happens. And I think the belief in the museum is a belief in the miracle. So for me, my answer to your question, which I know is a non-answer, is that it is very much about, you know, what makes sense in the institution as a bridge to the public. I'll just finish with one thing on Barbara, because Barbara, you know, the reason why I was asked this question by a senior museum director in Paris, but why her? Of all the people you could celebrate in museums, why her? And then, of course, when we did interviews, people asked us, so you chose an African-American artist. And, you know, Barbara herself actually would have disagreed to that. But my answer was always, of course, that she's an extraordinary artist, but that doesn't really justify a Nate Museum celebration. Because what I always said is that it wasn't a celebration, it's that Barbara had been going to those museums again and again and again, and she knew them inside out. And so I will say that I honestly don't think that there is a better artist that could have matched each of those museums better than her, of whatever the origin, whatever the age. Because she, for the Palais de Tokyo, is extraordinary. You know, she had been there at the time of the Musée National d'Art Moderne of Jean Cassou, like 56 years ago. So every place we went, she had a dialogue, she had a relation. So in a way, we saw her as an individual in that dialogue with the institution. And I'll finish on this, because as, you know, as I just said, we do not have to do, you know, anything contemporary as an institution. The Louvre, it's different if you're at Pompidou or Palais de Tokyo, it's a different story. But the Louvre doesn't have to. So if we do, it has to be something that is very much part of the grain of the institution and connect to the present. So. Sorry.
I think we can open to the questions.
Yeah, so it's the moment when we open questions to the audience, because we are comfortably sitting on the stage, but it's also very nice to hear your questions. And maybe we have many young people with us today, and now they all look really scared, so don't be. So Laurence and I are going to pass the
I realize this is supposed to be a discussion about Black artists in museums, but I really had a question, and I guess it can relate to including Black artists in museums from a point of view of representation. liberation and revolution. So I was wondering, connecting that with surrealism, and like we're here in the States and really looking up to Caribbean authors such as, well, of course, Fanon, but Aimé Césaire, and how he said that surrealism was like surrealism in art was like a step towards liberation, because it sort of totally changed your way of thinking. And you could start by changing your way of thinking to get on that path of liberation. So I'm noticing in both of your works, my sister, that, well, Alison, let's say, does these strong sculptures of women, but there's a surrealistic aspect to them. There's cotton coming out of their hair, or juxtapositions of other items that may seem surrealistic, so it's not like a flat-footed approach to making a statement towards racism and anti-slavery, or here in France, there's anti-colonialism, and it's different words for the same thing, okay? So, and then I also notice in your work, Gaëlle, this sort of ethereal and, let's see, more symbolist, and in a way also surrealistic approach to getting some ideas across. And just from hearing you talk, it seems like you're both very interested in liberation. Sorry, it's not about museums. We heard a lot about museums. So do you have anything to say about that?
Well, I think in terms of these sort of modes, whether it be surrealist, and I also think that's also true of what we look in terms of Black futurism, and that is kind of just changing up the playing field altogether. That is kind of creating this whole new space, a whole other space that doesn't exist, that we don't need to necessarily fit into, or we don't have to deal with that history. And so the surrealist sort of vision is a completely unknown world, or created or invented world, and the same with Black futurist world, in that we can set the rules and we can set that narrative without having to respond to a narrative that's already out there, I guess.
Yeah, for me it's also this question of spirituality, or to be connected to different worlds, visions. So, but it's also a way to escape a reality, It's also a way to just find a place where we feel, or we can change the rules, or imagine different new dreams, new, and yeah, in this way, it's I don't know if I never used surrealism, because it's really an identity really strong, and I think it misses the feminist party part of movement. Need to be a little bit more clear now, but yeah, for sure, there is this surrealist or unreal world adding on the historical world and reality. So it's different layers like that, additional.
Yeah, I have a question for Gaëlle Choisne. I would like to come back on something you said earlier, and I hope I was not misunderstanding what you were saying, but do tell me if that's the case. You said when you were working with Musée de l'Immigration, you were in a sort of conflict with the people there who were refusing part of your work for reasons that you sort of mentioned but did not really develop. So I'd like to know if you consider yourself, or if at that moment you considered yourself censored. Is that how you felt? And also, what was the sort of what created a sort of block between what you had to say? What were the subjects that were too difficult for them to accept, if that makes sense?
Thank you for your question. Okay, how can I, because if I start to explain the whole project, it was 1 year of work in the Palais. The Palais, it's already a schizophrenic place because there's so many different, I can say fields. You have the aquarium, you have the museum, you have the, you have the searchers, you have a lot of people and they don't have the same purpose in life, So it's also the definition of this place. But the project was 1 year grief, and each step of this burial was inspired by Kübler-Ross, American psychologue from 70s, decompose the grief in different steps, like the shock, deny, bargaining, angry, forgive, acceptation, depression. So each feelings become an event. And when it happened, angry become difficult. Because it's difficult to say everything is difficult to listen. So forgive, angry was those steps, and I think it's like a national. We are in this step at this moment in France to don't listen, maybe, some feelings, or maybe like I think about Assa Traoré, for example. It's a good example because she's the figure of this
Anger.
Fever, and no one wants to listen her. And we are in this step in France. But it's fine. I'm sure we're gonna pass by. I'm really optimistic.
Thank you. Very interesting.
Okay, we have a question here, right?
Hi, my question has to do with visibility and sustainability. I used to work at an art gallery in New York, and I was really struck by... Oh, you can, okay. Can you hear me now? Sorry. I used to work at an art gallery in New York, and I was very struck by how popular Black art was, or is now, when we know that there are some artists that were working as recently as the 1990s in obscurity, and their work has only really been recognized in the last 10 years, and they died without really being recognized for their work. And I guess my question is, some artists, like I'm thinking of like artists like Dinga McCannon or Emma Amos or Vivian Brown, who got their retrospectives recently or got gallery representation recently. How much is the work that we're doing now like a historic, like a moment, contemporary moment driven by like the air of the times or even market forces, and how much of it is hopefully a permanent correction of the historical record, or maybe both?
That's a question for you, Marianne. You're the queen of the market.
No, I'm not the queen of the market. Thank you for your question. I wish I was born in different times, so that we could take care of our predecessors that have not received the acknowledgement, and it is because institutions have chosen to work with specific type of artists, even though the artists were in that sort of a same practice. So you would find two artists, one being Black, one being, white American, both working as abstract minimalist, and one would be picked and not the other one. And then the success will come later. So how do you make up that time? Because these artists have families, they have an entourage, nobody wants to believe in them, and then it's only when there is few years left that suddenly everyone gets agitated like headless chicken, running around, getting them a retrospective, getting them a show, representing, you know, in sort of institution, but you cannot make up the time that you have lost and the education as well that could have been provided. So I am chasing as much as possible these artists, and I was very fortunate to work with Lorraine O'Grady and had 2 fantastic years with her while she was in her 90s. Although she gave me fake promises, she said that she has another 10 years with me, easy. But I miss her dearly because I've studied her. It was the first time that I had a relationship that turned quickly into a sort of a mentor relationship, and she was guiding me through all of that stage because there's so much, again, to learn. So yes, we enjoy working with young artists, and the market had a strong drive for these artists. But if we look at it today, it's also disintegrating because you cannot only work with artists because they're just Black. You also have to understand how relevant they are and how much you can develop also their career. So unfortunately, all of that suddenly happened when the Black Lives Matter was going on, where galleries without any serious agenda were suddenly picking up the artists. And then when we were out of this cloud of confusion of Black Lives Matter, they were like, okay, let's go back to the basic, meaning we are not pursuing working with these young Black artists. So my take is, it is a momentum, there is catching up with history, that there will be more and more artists present in this institution, which is why the work that we do and the work that a lot of galleries do, such as also Leland, is to make sure that the artists are visible in those institutions, in public spaces, because I consider institution to be the only barometer of successful artists in their career, not the market, because it just go up and down, and there's a lot of speculators. But yes, there is a big gap in terms of representation, especially older artists, and a lot of artists die without any success or any critical exhibition. I mean, you probably have met a few artists
and it's
at
really
that time.
heartbreaking.
Yeah, it is heartbreaking.
Or they just, have their first show and then, they pass
Yeah,
within
it's
that.
really
It's
sad.
just really heartbreaking. Better late than never.
It's
No,
true.
I'm
I
glad
know.
we
I
are
agree.
seeing
No,
these
I'm
artists, right?
yes. It's really heartbreaking to see them go, but at least they had a glimpse of their worth.
If I may continue, are you optimistic for the future?
Always.
You and both.
I wish, I pray. But I mean, it's also a question of survival, you know. I'm just like, I'm a live artist, I need to eat, you know. So but I hope also I try, the case of Haiti was also my contribution to say, oh, guys, look, this artist was in your walls and you don't have any works. So it's also like that to be in solidarity and.
I'm very optimistic because I know France will catch up. So where some places are saturated, French people will just jump in and they will just show a lot of artists and promote diversity. That's what I'm very optimistic in, and this is why we kind of moved to France, because we were imagining that they will catch up the delay.
I'm sure.
I believe. You will see in 5 years how many shows, and probably Donatien is hiding some that he's preparing, but I'm sure we will see more of these institutions, because I will say that there is no choice. There's no option. I'm just looking at you. You're in demand to request this kind of program and work. So the institution also has to reflect their audience and the people living in France. And the French people are immensely diverse, you know. So.
Okay. So my question is, how hard was it to be recognized as a black woman in art industry?
No,
Vous avez pas compris?
don't ask me. No, I'm not in an industry. No, you get how hard it is to black woman in the art industry.
How was it to be recognized?
I think as hard as in the film industry or music industry, and you know, but
Really difficult.
it's difficult. It's difficult to be a woman in any of this industry. But I think I don't measure how hard and things are, because you just keep doing and you just push and resist. And I think the advice I sort of have for people like me is to keep your integrity and to say no as much as possible. I think I learned it from the French culture. It helped me a lot in the US to say no at everything, and then you think about it. But I think it's changing, as Gaëlle mentioned. It's improving. And
You know, I would say that I'm standing on the shoulders of a lot of amazing black female artists, and I think as, you know, part of, you know, what our job is to do is to just continue to support other artists that are coming after us. And so I think that's really what it's about. And, you know, I never kind of went out and said, well, you know, I want to be a famous black female artist sort of thing. You know, it's always about making the art first. But I think, you know, with each generation, there are more women that are supporting each other as artists, or women that are supporting each other as curators. I mean, you know, I think Lowry Sims and Thelma were the only black curators in, you know, the early 80s that were really getting any sort of recognition and being in major institutions. And so, and I know that they have really influenced a lot of curators that have come up, and, you know, so it just keeps growing, and it's only through us really being supportive as artists of each other, so.
I had a question. Thank you guys all for being here. One of the things I wanted to note was, I've been to your gallery here. I'm from Chicago, so I haven't been to your gallery in Chicago, but I've seen your gallery here in Paris. And when I walk in there, I love to see, you know, strong, beautiful, elegant black women. I think about like just the recent Ayanna Jackson. And when I walk in there, I feel like this is my space. This is who I am. These are the kind of pictures, you know, that I want in my home. But I do find, and I think that, Alison, you spoke to this, when I go into institutional spaces, when I do see black representation, it is always from an enslaver perspective, a colonial perspective. It's an enslaved person. And my question to both of you are, how long did it take you to get to your voice, your vision, that you are not contorting yourself for what you think is appealing to a white gaze, what is appealing to what people want to see blackness as, and just being? Because I would think that being a woman, they want to see something. Being a woman of color, they want to see something. Where if I would assume, if I was potentially a white male, I could just be an impressionist. You know, I could just be going by my medium. I'm just a sculptor. You know, so I'm wondering, how has your journey been where you can say, this is who I am as an artist, as opposed to, I'm trying to eat, or I'm trying to be shown?
Go for it.
I felt always really free in my practice. I always said, I do what I want. If you like it, it's cool. If you hate it, fuck you. And it's also like a way to be in, like, really aligned with myself. But I can understand sometimes I did some maybe joke, or, for example, I select a work, and you can see it in the FRAC Île-de-France now, Le Plateau. Those two works are really interesting because one, I did it in 2018, and it's like a sculpture, kind of black sculpture. Maybe it's next one. The title is Do You Like My Black Ass? Or Black Artemis Defeus. So it's also a reference to the Greek sculptures. So of course it's a provocative title and it's also for a certain audience. But it's not on this selection, but in the exhibition in FRAC, yeah, this is, yeah. And the other works just there, it's really, really the last production I did. And it's the first step in a new, series, abstract theory. And I think to put a step in the abstraction, almost total abstraction, is also something for me where I feel I don't want to speak anymore. I'm tired. I said already a lot. I really need also to say things to understand also myself. And now I'm in this step, abstraction, and say also something, but in another way. And yeah, it's my way to express.
You just have to be really true to your own voice, and it's, I think a lot of these questions in terms of, how we fit into these institutions and whatnot, it's never really at the forefront of my practice. It's really about just going into the studio solitary and making things that I believe in, and not even making things that I think people will like. It's really just about what I need to say, and I just, and as you say, the market is very fickle. Sometimes I think that this may be a wave that will soon disappear, and we'll be back in another space, not to be the downer of the group, but I have seen that, I've seen it come and go, and I think, again, that with each wave that that visibility heightens and that it doesn't necessarily recede completely. So it's constantly kind of building and moving us forward. But, and then there's also a lot of amazing artists out there of color that are not being seen yet and who are not in the vogue. And, we got to make room for them as well. So,
I wanted to add to the fact that, yes, you're right about being in your own space and work. And it is not your job to go out there and knock at the doors and be your own agent. And this is why we do what we do. And if we were a little bit more, I think we will be knocking at more doors, whether there are institutions or projects. And I think it comes to that. An artist has to be preserved and be in its own shrine. And then there are other professionals in which we are part of that category to make things happen also for the artist. And, not at all means, but to be respectful to their practice. And naturally, if there is not a system of support for these artists, then there's not much happening either. And I'm in a place that is very difficult because there aren't many of us out there, and we can just count them on the hands. And so what do? You can't just be on that space and say, I'm the only black gallerist, I want to be the only black gallerist in that room. But we also have created connections as well with institutions such as the Spelman College, which is one of the HBCU, where we have a program during the summertime of inviting them and letting them know that we are absolutely inclusive and they can come and have the internship, whether they want to stay with us or not. But it did happen that one of them sort of stayed and worked with us. It's hard to be a young black art professional, and it's hard to even push the door of a gallery. You can look at all of the galleries in Paris, and please, write down the number of galleries where you see a person of color greeting you or taking care of you. These are very important because these are the future professionals and the future gallerists that might come into that space. So we also, the galleries need to also make room for those individuals and train them. And we are very, when people say, well, but they don't apply, and they often say that, we can send you all of the resume we receive.
Exactly.
Because they do apply at our place because they feel safe and they feel that they feel comfortable. But I think that sort of a diversity needs to happen, not only in the institutions, in the galleries, everywhere, even in the art installers, even in the art shipping company. So it is an ecosystem that needs to talk about diversity from the top to the bottom of that industry. So we hope that more and more individuals will knock at our door and also want to be like us, I would say, and follow this sort of a path. So.
First of all, I want to just say thanks for the panel. It's been such a rich, wonderful conversation. And thanks, too, for the organizers who made room for so many young people in the room, a kind of rainbow picture that's delightful. But my question refers to the comment that the museum is a place of miracles. And I wonder if the artists could say a word about the miracle making that is enabled by the curator that is doing the best kind of job that you want done as an artist. If it's a place where the art is transformed and where viewers are transformed through the experience in the museum, what good is a curator at his or her best? And secondly, if a museum is really doing the work that you as an artist want done most to make your work more miracle making, where have you seen that happen? And can you say a word about that kind of museum?
Let you go first. Yeah, I mean, I think what's really exciting for me is when you come into a space and a curator has really not only looked for like what is the new thing or who is this new artist, but when they're really kind of showing these connections. I'm really intrigued with curators that are making connections that are outside of, you know, a school of art or outside of, a linear way of looking at art and things like that, but they're really kind of looking and saying, oh yeah, there's this really curious connection that sometimes can't even be verbalized, but to kind of, and that's what's really exciting. I'm trying to remember, I was at a show recently where it was just kind of mind-blowing because you walk into this room and say, oh, what do all of these things have in common? And then as you go around and you start seeing, I guess, through the curator's eyes, and you start seeing these connections that you wouldn't necessarily come up with yourself, I really appreciate that. Then that it really gives us an opportunity to see works that we may have seen a million times over again through a different lens and see how they're connecting to, you know, Alma Thomas and Bonnard, or, you know, just these kind of curious things that we wouldn't necessarily make those strings that pull together. And so that's what's really exciting for me, go into a show that really kind of steps outside of these very sort of staid, linear ideas of what art and how art can connect to each other and how art can connect to its audience.
True, because it reminds me a story that, like, I mean, I had a magical experience with the curator not long time ago, and we're working on this project still. Eva Vaslamadzi proposed me a few years ago to do a project because she discovered a collection of Haitian paintings from Haiti hiding in an island in Greece, in a house private collection alone since years and years and years. It's a French collector, Jean-Marie Drault, and he was obsessed with Haiti. And Eva came to me and said, okay, you did and you create this project, Temple of Love. Jean-Marie Drault called his museum, his collection, Friendship, Museum of Friendship. Let's try to do something. And when I discovered the collection, I was impressed. Like 500 pieces, and from really like a lot of different artists from Haiti, from 70s. And it was a part of my legacy, actually, I find there. So it was magical, actually. And I decided to include some of those paintings in my shows, my solo show I did in Venice last year. And we will do a second show in Athens, in Benaki. I wish a French institution can welcome this project, because, yeah, makes sense, you know. Because it's also a way to rediscover the Haitian naive art that they called, with a new gaze. So yeah, it was the most magical experience I think I had.
Sorry, I can't resist, because when you speak about a museum as a place of miracle, it happens sometimes, but most of the time I would say that museum might also be really boring places, and it really depends on the people. There are some people, very wonderful curators, but I wouldn't say that they are the majority. And sometimes it happens that you would find somebody really great. And Donatien just wrote a book about some collection of interviews of wonderful people, curators. And it's a story of passion, of maybe obsession, of symbiosis between artists or objects and the people who are dedicated with this. But they do not form the majority somehow. And but it's the same with artists. You could find also some very bureaucratic artists.
No, I'll just thank you so much. That's what you said was very kind. When I think of the miracle is on the side of the audience, you know. And it's interesting, as someone who sometimes curates shows, I think it would be very strange if I started telling you I think of myself as a miracle maker, but I only, you know, think of myself as someone who assists, who collaborates. So, for example, I mean, as I said, we just had this beautiful project with Mohamed Bouissa, and if you look at the Ours, the list of names, you don't see me as a curator, it's in collaboration with me. So I think the miracle is really on the side of the audience, and from the point of view, and the role of artists in a heritage institution is that you are both on the side of the collection, because, you know, your work is in museum collections, and you are on the side of the audience. The miracle is what happens when, you know, I mean, one of the things I love to do at the Louvre is to look at what people look at. So of course, everybody says everybody's looking at the Mona Lisa, which in itself is actually a very interesting, but just when you wander across a museum, look at what people look at, and yourself try to look at things. But it's very interesting how someone will catch your attention that isn't what you would expect at all.
Okay, thank you so much. I think we are going to call it a day.
Sorry,
or do you want to add
say
something?
That. I wanted to thank all of my panelists, and I wanted you to give an amazing round of applause for our panelists and artists, but also...
Clémentine.
Thank you to Clémentine, Colas.
but also our wonderful host, Clémentine Tolas, who has been...
Well, I know I'm not the only person keeping you away from drinks, but in order to conclude, I would say that we are very, very grateful and very lucky that so many great artists, curators, museum professionals believed in this project and agreed to join us. And honestly, without the support of the Terra Foundation, without people from Frame, it would not have been possible. But also, you know, all the people who joined the roundtable for 3 years really supported us with their great ideas, inspired us, and it was extremely moving. And Laurence and I are very, very proud also to pass on this strong message to younger generations. So I suggest that we should try to take a group photo inside, because I don't know if it's still raining, and then we are going to navigate through the maze of La Sorbonne. And honestly, if you manage to find Le Club des Enseignants, you are really a champion, because it's a very tricky way. So thank you again to the wonderful panelists, to Alison, to Gaëlle, for being with us. And thank you for the people in the audience.
Merci.
It's hard, I'm not a real panel person either, so.
Clémentine, on a fait comment la photo?
Thank you so much.
Tout le monde a parlé là.
Like I was saying, I feel very awkward.